Liberal Congresswoman in full panic as Pam Bondi exposes her biggest scandal. The grand halls of Capitol Hill were buzzing with energy. Reporters gathered in clusters, murmuring in hushed tones about what was expected to be a routine congressional hearing. But behind the scenes, something far more significant was brewing. Pam Bondi, the former Florida Attorney General known for her sharp legal mind and fearless approach, was set to testify before the committee. Seated across from her was Congresswoman Evelyn Carter, a staunch liberal figure who had built her career on promises of integrity and justice. But today, the tension in the air signaled that the narrative was about to shift dramatically. Bondi sat with her usual poise, exuding confidence as she adjusted the microphone in front of her. Carter, on the other hand, appeared composed on the surface, but a keen observer could notice the slight tremor in her hands as she shuffled through documents. The hearing commenced with routine formalities, but the atmosphere changed the moment Bondi took the floor. She leaned forward, her voice steady, yet piercing. "Madam Chairwoman, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Transparency and accountability should be the cornerstone of our government. Wouldn't you agree?" Carter forced a smile. "Of course, Ms. Bondi. That is why we hold these hearings, to ensure that justice prevails." Bondi nodded. "That's good to hear, because the American people deserve to know the truth, even when it's inconvenient for certain officials." The room fell silent. Reporters sensed something was coming. Carter swallowed hard. Bondi pulled out a thick folder, placing it deliberately on the table. "This, Madam Chairwoman, is a collection of documents obtained through investigative efforts. These documents detail financial irregularities, misuse of government funds, and ethical violations. And they all point back to one office, yours." A murmur swept through the chamber. Carter's face stiffened. "This is outrageous," she said, her voice rising slightly. "If you're going to make such accusations, I hope you have the evidence to back them up." Bondi remained unshaken. "Oh, I have more than enough evidence. Let's start with a simple one. A government contract awarded to a company with direct ties to your campaign donors, bypassing standard bidding procedures. Would you care to explain why this particular firm received preferential treatment?" Carter's lips parted, but no. Words came out. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the visible shift in her demeanor. "Those contracts followed all legal protocols," Carter finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. Bondi raised an eyebrow. "Really? Because these emails suggest otherwise." She slid several printed emails across the table. "These show correspondence between your office and company executives, discussing how to ensure they secured the deal before the bidding even started." Carter scanned the papers, her face growing paler with each line she read. The hearing room was dead silent, every eye fixed on her. This is being taken out of context," Carter stammered. Bondi wasn't finished. "Context. Let's talk about context. Your campaign received a sudden influx of donations right after that contract was awarded, nearly triple the usual amount from corporate donors connected to that very company." Carter shifted uncomfortably. She reached for her water glass, her hand trembling slightly. Bondi continued, flipping through another set of documents. "And then there's this, a series of payments made to consulting firms that, upon further investigation, don't appear to exist. The funds, however, were traced to personal accounts tied to individuals within your inner circle." Carter's jaw tightened. "This is a political attack," she snapped. "You are twisting information to fit a narrative." Bondi leaned back slightly, studying Carter with a knowing expression. "Madam Chairwoman, I don't deal in narratives. I deal in facts, and the facts are right here." The committee members exchanged glances. Even those usually aligned with Carter seemed uneasy. Then Bondi delivered the final blow. "And lastly, there's the issue of taxpayer-funded travel expenses, luxury hotels, first-class flights, extravagant meals. Over $500,000 spent in the last 2 years alone, with vague justification." You've billed the American people for your personal indulgences. The room erupted into murmurs and gasps. Carter's composure was unraveling. That's enough, she snapped. I will not sit here and be subjected to baseless accusations. Bondi didn't flinch. Baseless? Then I assume you'll have no problem if we call for a full federal audit of your office's financial records. Carter's silence was deafening. Beads of sweat formed at her temple. She turned to her aides, who avoided her gaze. A conservative congressman on the committee, sensing blood in the water, spoke up. I think an audit is a fantastic idea. The American people deserve transparency. One by one, other committee members, even those reluctant to go against Carter, nodded in agreement. The cameras captured every second of Carter's crumbling defense. Reporters were already drafting explosive headlines. Carter exhaled sharply, her political career flashing before her eyes. She forced a smile, though it barely held. I welcome any review that proves my innocence. Bondi gave a small nod. Good, because the American people are watching, and they deserve answers. The gavel pounded. The hearing was adjourned, but the damage was already done. As Carter hurriedly exited, her usual air of confidence had vanished. Pam Bondi had done what she did best, exposed the truth, leaving corruption nowhere to hide. Outside the hearing room, a storm was brewing. Reporters rushed to their cameras, breaking the story in real time. Headlines flashed across television screens and social media platforms. Pam Bondi exposes Congresswoman Evelyn Carter's alleged corruption. Bombshell hearing. Carter caught in financial scandal. Calls for resignation grow after Bondi's stunning revelation. Carter moved swiftly, her security detail clearing a path through the horde of journalists shouting questions. Congresswoman Carter, do you deny the allegations? Will you resign? Did you misuse taxpayer funds? Her face remained stone-like, but panic flickered in her eyes. She pushed forward, refusing to acknowledge the chaos. Meanwhile, Bondi stepped calmly out of the hearing room. The press swarmed her next, but unlike Carter, she didn't run. She turned to face the cameras, her expression cool and composed. This isn't about politics, she stated firmly. This is about accountability. If public officials misuse their power, they should answer for it, no matter their party. The journalists fired more questions, but Bondi only gave one last remark before stepping into her car. The American people deserve better, and they're about to get it. Behind closed doors. Inside Carter's office, the mood was frantic. Her senior aides scrambled to control the damage. A press secretary barked orders. Lawyers flipped through legal texts, searching for a way to spin the crisis. Carter sat in her chair, massaging her temples. Her political career, once untouchable, was now dangling by a thread. We need a statement, one aide said urgently. Something strong. Maybe call this a partisan witch hunt? No, Carter muttered, her voice hoarse. That won't work. The evidence is too damning. A strategist hesitated before speaking. Then we need a distraction. Something big? We shift the narrative. Carter lifted her gaze. Like what? The room fell silent. Then an idea emerged. We go after Bondi. A murmur spread through the team. The strategy was clear. Discredit Bondi, attack her credibility, and shift the focus. I want everything on her, Carter ordered. Every case she's ever handled, every speech she's given. Find something we can use. Her team nodded, springing into action. But deep down, Carter knew the battle had already turned against her. The aftermath. As the days passed, the fallout worsened. Federal agencies announced an official inquiry into Carter's finances. Her approval ratings nosedived. Even members of her own party distanced themselves. Bondi, on the other hand, was being praised for her fearless approach. Interviews flooded in, with networks eager to hear her thoughts on political corruption. Then came the final blow. A whistleblower, someone from Carter's own inner circle, came forward with even more damning evidence. A former aide, now cooperating with investigators, revealed additional fraudulent dealings, sealed Carter's fate. Public outrage skyrocketed. Protesters gathered outside her office, demanding her resignation. And then it happened. A statement from Carter's office was released. Congresswoman Evelyn Carter is stepping down, effective immediately. The news sent shockwaves through Washington. A high-profile liberal figure, forced out by scandal, all because Pam Bondi had dared to expose the truth. Final moments. As Carter packed up her office, she stared out the window at the crowds below. She had once been a rising star. Now, she was a disgraced politician. Meanwhile, Bondi stood before a group of reporters once more. "This isn't about one politician," she said. "It's about a system that needs to change. And if I have anything to do with it, that change starts now." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving behind a legacy of accountability. The fallout spreads. Evelyn Carter's resignation sent ripples through Washington. Political commentators debated the implications on primetime news. Some called it a warning shot to corrupt politicians. Others saw it as a seismic shift in the political landscape. Meanwhile, federal investigators wasted no time. The Department of Justice launched a formal investigation into Carter's financial dealings, and subpoenas were issued to her former staffers. Bank records, email chains, and confidential documents became the subject of scrutiny. Pam Bondi, however, wasn't celebrating just yet. She knew this wasn't over. Corruption didn't end with one resignation. It ran much deeper. Carter's last stand. In a desperate bid to salvage what remained of her reputation, Carter attempted to shift the narrative. She agreed to a sit-down interview with a sympathetic journalist, hoping to paint herself as a victim. "The truth," she insisted, "is that this was a political assassination. I was targeted because I was an outspoken advocate for progressive change." The interviewer nodded, but the public wasn't buying it. The evidence against Carter was overwhelming, and her excuses rang hollow. When the journalist pressed her about the contracts, the fraudulent payments, and the lavish spending, Carter's demeanor faltered. She hesitated. "I trusted my advisors. If mistakes were made, they were not intentional." But it was too late. The American people had seen the documents. They had heard the whistleblower's testimony. No amount of spin could erase the facts. Pam Bondi's next move. As Carter's interview failed to gain traction, Bondi was already looking ahead. She sat in a private meeting with key political figures, discussing the broader implications of the scandal. "This isn't just about one congresswoman," Bondi said, her tone serious. "It's about a culture of corruption. We need deeper investigations, more transparency, and stricter accountability measures." One senator nodded. "You've exposed something bigger than just Carter. This could be the start of a national reckoning." Bondi agreed. "And I intend to see it through." A turning point. The pressure on Washington intensified. Other politicians, fearing exposure, rushed to clean up their records. Political insiders whispered about which high-profile figures might be next. Bondi, meanwhile, continued her mission. She made public appearances, urging reforms, calling for stronger anti-corruption laws, and encouraging whistleblowers to come forward. Her popularity soared. Some even speculated she might have a future in higher office. But for Bondi, this wasn't about political ambition, it was about justice. The final blow. Then, the final twist came. A breaking news report revealed that Carter wasn't just under investigation, she was facing criminal charges. Fraud, embezzlement, abuse of power. The Justice Department announced an official indictment. If convicted, Carter could be facing years behind bars. The public's reaction was swift. The same supporters who once cheered her now demanded accountability. Even her former allies abandoned her, unwilling to defend the indefensible. Carter's fall from grace was complete. The legacy of the scandal. Months later, as Carter prepared for a court battle, Pam Bondi remained a symbol of integrity. Her actions had exposed more than just one corrupt politician. She had ignited a movement. People demanded more transparency in government, and other officials were now being held to a higher standard. In an era where trust in politics was at an all-time low, Bondi had proven that truth still had power. And, as she walked through the halls of Capitol Hill once more, she knew this was only the beginning. Carter's trial begins. The courtroom was packed. Spectators, reporters, and legal experts filled every available seat, eager to witness the trial that could redefine accountability in Washington. Evelyn Carter, once a powerful Congresswoman, now sat at the defendant's table, her once commanding presence reduced to a shadow of its former self. Pam Bondi, though not part of the prosecution team, watched closely from the front row. She had been the catalyst for this moment, and she wasn't about to let corruption escape justice. The prosecution wasted no time laying out its case. They presented financial records, email exchanges, and witness testimonies from former staffers, who had turned against Carter in exchange for immunity. The evidence was damning. "This is not a case of clerical errors or misunderstandings," the lead prosecutor declared. "This was a deliberate abuse of power, a betrayal of the American people." Carter's defense struggled to counter the overwhelming evidence. They tried to paint her as a victim of political persecution, but the facts were impossible to ignore. Then came the biggest blow. A key witness, a former financial officer from Carter's office, took the stand. His testimony was explosive. "I was instructed to reroute taxpayer funds through shell companies," he revealed. "These funds were later used for personal expenses, luxury vacations, private events, and even campaign debts." Gasps filled the courtroom. Carter's face turned pale. The judge called for order, but the damage was done. The verdict. After weeks of arguments and deliberations, the jury returned with their decision. The courtroom fell silent as the foreperson stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant Evelyn Carter guilty on all counts." The gavel slammed. Carter closed her eyes, her career, her reputation, and her freedom slipping away in an instant. The judge, stern and unwavering, delivered the sentence. "For your crimes of fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of power, this court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison." A mixture of cheers and stunned silence filled the air. Pam Bondi, watching it unfold, knew this was bigger than one person's downfall. This was a warning to every corrupt official who thought they were untouchable. A new era of accountability. In the weeks that followed, Bondi became a national icon. Invitations for interviews poured in. Political leaders reached out, seeking her insights on anti-corruption measures. Some even encouraged her to consider a future in office. But Bondi remained focused. "This isn't about me," she told reporters. "It's about the American people. It's about restoring trust in our institutions. And if exposing corruption helps bring that change, then I'll keep doing it." Meanwhile, reforms swept through Washington. New ethics laws were proposed. Investigations into other officials gained momentum. The political establishment had been shaken, and no one was safe from scrutiny anymore. Carter's final days in the spotlight. Behind bars, Evelyn Carter was no longer a powerful figure. She was just another inmate. She spent her days reflecting on how quickly she had fallen. The power, the money, the influence, it was all gone. and all because she thought she was above the rules. The last time she appeared in the news, it was in a grainy prison photo wearing an orange jumpsuit, a far cry from the polished politician she once was. Pam Bondi's mission continues. As the dust settled, Bondi wasn't slowing down. With Carter's trial behind her, she set her sights on new investigations, ensuring that what happened to Carter wouldn't be an isolated case. She had proven that justice could prevail, even against the most powerful. And with the American people behind her,